The wind rolling down from the high granite peaks of the Colorado Rockies carried the smell of snow long before the clouds turned gray. In late 1886, that scent followed Jonah Crow all the way into the rough mining town of Silverton. He rode a bay gelding that looked as weathered as he did, all bone and stubborn grit. Jonah was lean from months alone on a trap line, his buckskin stained with pine pitch and elk blood. His eyes were the color of flint, always moving, always watching, like a man who expected trouble to step out from behind any door. Jonah did not like towns. He did not like the noise, the stares, or the way men in clean coats looked at him as if he carried disease. But a man could not live on silence forever. He needed supplies. More than that, he needed land. He was tired of drifting like smoke, yet he wanted a door he could close and say, "This ground is mine." Inside the courthouse, the air smelled of old paper and cigar smoke. A bored clerk droned through a list of seized properties, while a few cattlemen and land speculators shuffled their boots. Then the clerk announced Lot 42, a cabin and claim on Black Pine Ridge, seized for tax default. Laughter moved through the room. Black Pine Ridge was high and brutal country, buried in snow half the year. The trail washed out every spring. The cabin was rumored cursed. An old trapper had lived there and died crazy, or so the town said. The clerk asked for a bid. Silence answered. One man spat into a brass cuspidor and muttered that the wind up there screamed like a banshee. Another said the roof had likely collapsed. The clerk sighed and prepared to pass the lot. $1, Jonah said. The room went still. Heads turned toward the shadows at the back. Jonah stepped forward, the scar along his jaw catching the light from the high windows. He did not smile. He did not explain himself. He simply laid a silver dollar on the desk. The gavel cracked like a pistol shot. Sold. The clerk called him a fool and said he had bought himself a grave. Jonah folded the deed carefully and tucked it into his coat. If it was a grave, it would be his. By late afternoon, he was climbing toward the ridge, snow already hissing against his face. The trees grew twisted and ancient the higher he rode. The world became quieter, heavier. By the time he reached the clearing where the cabin stood, the sky was bruised purple and orange behind the peaks. The cabin looked like a husk left behind by a dead world. A sagging porch, weather-scarred logs, tin patches hammered into the roof. It was rough, but it was his rough. He tied his horse and walked toward the door, already planning repairs in his head. Then he stopped. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from the chimney. Jonah's hand moved to the knife at his belt. The deed in his pocket said, "Abandoned." The smoke said otherwise. Boot prints marked the snow near the porch. Small ones. Fresh. He stepped onto the porch without a sound and listened. Inside, faint metal scraped against iron. Someone tending a stove. Jonah lifted the latch and pushed the door open. The cabin was dim, lit by the orange glow of a stove and a low kerosene lamp. The air smelled of wood smoke and fear. In the corner stood a woman. She was thin, dressed in a faded wool dress mended too many times to count. And her dark hair was braided over her shoulder. Her hands were shaking, but the Winchester rifle she held was aimed straight at Jonah's chest. "Get out!" she said. Her voice was steady, flat, not loud. The voice of someone who had learned screaming did nothing. Jonah raised his hand slowly. "This is my cabin," he said. "Bought it in town today." "You're lying," she answered. "I paid $1." The wind slammed against the walls outside. Snow rattled the single-pane window. Jonah noticed the bruises around her wrists, the way she favored one side, as if her ribs were taped, the hollows beneath her cheekbones that spoke of hunger. "I'm not leaving," he said calmly. "Storm's coming. I have food. I'm not throwing you into a blizzard." Her eyes flickered to the sack of flour on the porch, while hunger moved across her face before she hid it again. "Put your knife on the table," she ordered. Jonah hesitated. A man did not give up his blade lightly, but he saw the tremor in her hands. He unbuckled the sheath and laid the knife down. She angled the rifle slightly away from his heart, but did not lower it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Millie," she said after a pause. "Millie LaRue." Jonah Crow. They moved around each other carefully as he brought in his supplies. The door barred against the wind. The cabin grew darker as night fell hard and fast. Jonah unrolled his bedroll near the drafty door, far from her. Millie sat on the narrow bed with the rifle across her lap, watching him as if he might vanish or attack at any moment. Hours passed. The storm howled like a living thing outside, but then Jonah heard something beneath the wind. Boots, multiple, crunching through snow. He sat up. Millie was already standing, her face drained of color. "They're here," she whispered. "They'll drag me back." Jonah did not ask who they were. He did not ask what she had done. "Kill the light," he ordered. The lamp went dark. The cabin dropped into shadow. He smothered the stove's glow and pulled Millie down behind the heavy table. Outside, men shouted over the gale. One voice insisted no one was inside. Another argued he had seen smoke. The latch rattled. Jonah's revolver clicked softly as he pulled the hammer back. "Locked," a voice said outside. "Probably rusted shut." After a long, painful pause, the boots moved away. Jonah waited until only the storm remained. When the lamp was relit, but Millie was still trembling on the floor. "I was told you would come," she whispered. Jonah frowned. "Etienne," she said. "The old man who lived here. He told me to wait. Said a man stubborn enough to buy this place would stand between me and the town." Jonah looked at the rotting walls, the sagging roof, the woman hunted like prey. He had spent $1, but he realized he had not bought a cabin. He had bought a war. The storm did not stop that night. It pressed against the cabin like a living beast trying to claw its way inside. Snow piled high against the door. The wind forced itself through cracks in the logs and made the walls groan. But Jonah Crow did not move from his place near the door. He sat with his revolver resting across his thigh, eyes fixed on the darkness outside the window. Millie LaRue had not gone back to the bed. She stayed close to the table, wrapped in a thin blanket Jonah had handed her without a word. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp. She had lived too long in fear to sleep through it. "They won't stop," she said quietly. Jonah did not look at her. "Who are they?" She swallowed. "Sheriff Boone and his men. But they ain't hunting criminals. They're hunting land." Jonah finally turned his head. The name meant something. Boone owned half of Silverton. The other half wished they did. Millie drew her knees closer to her chest. "Etienne LaRue was my uncle. This cabin, this ridge, it ain't cursed. There's silver beneath it. He found it before Boone did. That's why they said he was crazy. That's why they let him die alone." The wind slammed the roof as if to agree. Jonah's jaw tightened. And you?" "They wanted the deed," she answered. "Uncle hid it. Told me if anything happened, I was to come here and wait. Said a man would come. A mountain man. Stubborn as stone." She looked at him in a way that made his chest feel tight. Jonah did not believe in prophecy. He believed in tracks in the snow and bullets in chambers. But the old trapper had known something. Maybe he knew the kind of man who would risk Black Pine Ridge for $1. "Do you have the deed?" Jonah asked. Millie hesitated. Then she reached beneath a loose floorboard near the stove. From inside, she pulled a folded oilskin packet and handed it to him. Jonah opened it carefully. Inside was a proper claim deed, stamped and sealed. Not worthless land, not cursed land, valuable land. Boone had not been chasing a frightened woman, yet he had been chasing ownership. A loud crack echoed outside. Not thunder. Wood. Jonah stood instantly. The men had returned. This time, they were not testing the latch. They were circling. Millie's breathing grew shallow. "They'll burn it," she whispered. Jonah grabbed his coat and stepped toward the door. "You can't fight them all," she said. "I don't need to," he answered. He stepped outside into the storm. The wind cut like knives. Snow blinded him within seconds. But Jonah knew terrain better than men knew lies. He circled wide through the trees instead of staying near the cabin. His boots sank deep, but he moved low and silent. Through the curtain of snow, he spotted 3 shapes near the tree line. One man held a lantern shielded by his coat. Another carried a can of kerosene. Jonah did not shout. He did not warn. Well, he fired once. The lantern exploded into darkness. Chaos followed. Men cursed and stumbled in the snow. One slipped. Another fired blindly toward the cabin. Jonah moved again before they could fix his position. He fired a second shot, close enough to a man's boot to make him scream. "You come back up this ridge," Jonah called through the wind, his voice steady and cold. "You won't go home." Silence answered him, except for the storm. Boots crunched away, slipping, retreating. Jonah waited long after they vanished. Only when the snow erased their tracks did he return to the cabin. Millie stood just inside the door, rifle still in her hands. When she saw him, something inside her broke. Not fear, relief. "They left?" she asked. "For now." He shut the door and dropped the bar back into place. Snow clung to his coat and beard. Millie reached forward without thinking and brushed it away from his shoulder. The small act startled them both. "You could walk away," she said softly. "You didn't know what you were buying." Jonah removed his gloves slowly. "I did." She looked confused. "I bought land," he said, "and I don't let anyone push me off what's mine." He stepped closer to the stove and added wood. The fire came back to life, casting warm light across her face. For the first time since he had arrived, the rifle lowered completely. "You ain't afraid?" she asked. "Of Boone?" Jonah shook his head. "No." "Of me?" That made him pause. He studied her properly now. The strength in her eyes, the stubborn set of her chin, the way she had survived alone in a mountain cabin through winter. "I reckon," he said slowly. "Well, you're the least frightening thing on this ridge." A faint smile touched her lips, small and fragile, but real. The storm began to weaken near dawn. The worst of it had passed. Pale light filtered through the window, turning the snow outside into a silver sea. Jonah stepped onto the porch and looked out across the ridge. The world was silent and new again. But down in the valley below, he could see smoke rising from town. And something else. 3 riders. Not leaving. Watching. Jonah felt it deep in his bones. Boone would not give up. Not over silver. Not over pride. He stepped back inside and closed the door gently. Millie looked up at him. "They'll come again," she said. "Yes," Jonah answered. He held up the deed she had given him. "But this time, he said quietly. "They'll find we're ready." Morning came quiet, but it did not come peaceful. The snow on Black Pine Ridge shone bright under the pale sun, smooth and untouched, except for the path Jonah had made before dawn. He had not wasted the early light. While Millie melted snow for coffee, Jonah worked fast. He dragged fallen logs into a low barricade near the tree line. He shoveled snow into thick walls along the porch. He positioned himself where the cabin had cover, but the riders below did not. This was no longer about $1. It was about ground. By mid-morning, the 3 riders began their climb. They did not hide this time. Sheriff Boone rode in front, heavy coat flapping in the cold wind. He was a broad man with a trimmed mustache and eyes that held no warmth. 2 deputies followed, rifles resting across their saddles. Jonah stood on the porch, rifle steady, but not raised. Millie stayed inside behind the window, the Winchester in her hands. She was done trembling. Boone stopped his horse 10 yards from the porch. "Morning," Boone called, voice loud and confident. "You've got something that belongs to me." Jonah did not blink. "Bought this place fair." Boone smiled thinly. "From a clerk who doesn't know the law. That cabin's under dispute, and that woman inside is wanted for theft." Millie's jaw tightened behind the glass. "What'd she steal?" Jonah asked calmly. "Documents, claim papers, property that ain't hers." Jonah stepped down from the porch slowly, boots crunching in the snow. He kept his rifle low but ready. "You got proof?" he asked. Boone's smile faded. "I'm the proof." Silence settled heavy between them. Jonah had lived his life reading men the way he read tracks. What Boone's hands were too tight on the reins. His eyes moved too much. He wanted fear. He expected Jonah to fold like the others in town. Instead, Jonah reached into his coat and held up the sealed deed. "This claim is legal," he said. "Filed proper. Signed by Etienne Leroux before he died." Boone's face darkened. "That old fool was unstable," Boone snapped. "He signed nothing of value." Millie pushed the cabin door open and stepped outside. Her braid swung against her shoulder. Her coat was patched but clean. Her voice carried strong across the snow. "He signed it in front of witnesses," she said. "2 minors and the pastor. You buried the record, Sheriff, but you can't bury truth." Boone's horse shifted nervously. The deputies glanced at each other. Jonah could see it clearly now. Boone's power depended on fear. Without it, and he was just a man in a heavy coat. "You ride back down," Jonah said quietly, "and leave this ridge alone." Boone's jaw clenched. "Or what?" Jonah lifted his rifle, not at Boone's chest, but at the saddle strap beneath him. "Or you walk home." The deputies shifted again. One muttered that the storm had nearly frozen them the night before. The other looked at the steep slope behind them. Boone realized something in that moment. He had come expecting a scared woman and an easy threat. He found a mountain man who did not scare. The wind moved through the trees, soft but steady. Finally, Boone spat into the snow. "This ain't over," he said. Jonah nodded once. "It is on this ridge." Boone turned his horse sharply and began the descent. The deputies followed without another word. Jonah did not lower his rifle until they disappeared into the trees. Only then did he breathe. Millie stepped closer to him, her shoulders slowly relaxing. "You didn't even fire," she said. "Didn't need to." She looked down at the deed still in his hand. "You could still sell it," she said softly. "Make good money. Leave this place behind." Jonah studied the cabin, the sagging porch, the crooked chimney, the smoke curling steady into the cold air. He thought about years drifting from valley to valley, eating alone, sleeping under trees, speaking only to the wind. Then he looked at Millie. "I reckon," he said slowly, "this place was waiting for more than one person." Her breath caught at that. Snow began to melt from the roof, dripping in slow rhythm. The ridge felt different now. Not hunted, not haunted, claimed. Well, weeks passed. Jonah repaired the roof. Millie planted a small garden once the thaw came. They worked side by side without needing many words. The cabin grew stronger. So did the silence between them, but it was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Down in Silverton, Boone lost influence. Word spread that the mountain man had stood his ground. People remembered the pastor's record. The miners spoke up. Truth moved slower than lies, but it moved steady. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks and painted the sky in gold and fire, Millie stood on the porch watching Jonah stack wood. "You ever regret that $1?" she asked. Jonah leaned the axe against the stump. He walked toward her slowly. "No," he said. He looked at the land stretching wide and free before them. "I got more than I paid for." Millie smiled, and for the first time since she had stepped into that cabin months before, her smile held no fear. The mountain wind no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like home.